HR Basics is a series of short courses designed to highlight what you need to know about a particular human resource management topic. In today's HR Basics, we explore reasonable accommodation, first by understanding the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then by suggesting best management practices for reasonable accommodation. A reasonable accommodation is any change or adjustment to a job or the work environment that will enable an applicant or employee with a disability to participate in the application process or perform the essential job functions. To best manage reasonable accommodations in your organization, understand both the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is an anti-discrimination law intended to make sure that people with disabilities have the same rights and opportunities as everyone else, and the best management practices around reasonable accommodation, which are required under the Act, to any change or adjustment to a job or the work environment that will enable an applicant or employee with a disability to participate in the application process or perform essential job functions. The Americans with Disabilities Act is a federal civil rights law that was passed in 1990 and went into effect at the beginning of 1992. Its purpose is to protect people with disabilities from discrimination in employment. The Americans with Disabilities Act, known as the ADA, became law in 1990. The ADA is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life. The purpose of the law is to make sure that people with disabilities have the same rights and opportunities as everyone else. The ADA is divided into 5 titles or sections that relate to different areas of public life. In 2008, the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendment Act, or ADAAA, was signed into law. The ADAAA made a number of significant changes to the definition of disability. Title I of the Act is designed to help people with disabilities access the same employment opportunities and benefits available to people without disabilities. The ADA applies to all aspects of employment, including job advertisements, job application, job interviews, and post-offer medical examinations. Although many of the ADA rules that apply to applications and new hires are the same as the rules for employees, there are some differences. There are 5 important definitions that all human resource professionals need to understand when it comes to the ADA. They include covered entities, qualified individuals, employee, disability, and essential function. Only covered entities must comply with Title I of the ADA. The term covered entity includes employers with 15 or more employees, employment agencies, labor organizations, and joint labor management committees. Title I protects qualified employees with disabilities. The term qualified means that the individual satisfies the job-related requirements of the position sought or held and can perform the essential job functions of the position with or without reasonable accommodation. The term employee means an individual employed by an employer. The question of whether an employee-employer relationship exists is situational and depends on whether the employer controls the means and the manner of the worker's work performance. Not everyone with a medical condition is protected by the law. In order to be protected, a person must be qualified for the job and have a disability as defined by law. The term disability means a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. A person with a record of a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, and a person who is regarded as having a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. The term essential job function means the fundamental job duties of the employment position that the individual with a disability holds or desires. The term essential functions does not include marginal functions of the position. The EEOC, or Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, is responsible for developing guidelines and overseeing compliance with most anti-discrimination laws, including the Americans with Disabilities Act. In addition to a variety of formal guidance documents, the EEOC has developed a wide range of fact sheets, question and answer documents, and other publications to help employees and employers understand the complex issues surrounding disability discrimination. A reasonable accommodation is a modification or adjustment of a job, the work environment, or the way things usually are done that enables a qualified individual with a disability to enjoy an equal employment opportunity. An equal employment opportunity means an opportunity to attain the same level of performance or to enjoy equal benefits and privileges of employment as are available to an average, similarly situated employee without a disability. The ADA requires reasonable accommodation in three aspects of employment: to ensure equal opportunity in the application process, to enable a qualified individual with a disability to perform the essential functions of a job, and to enable an employee with a disability to enjoy equal benefits and privileges of employment. Examples of reasonable accommodations could include making facilities accessible, job restructuring, modified work schedules, modified equipment, changing policies or procedures, changing or adapting training, providing interpreters, and job reassignment. According to the EEOC, any individual may use plain language and need not mention the ADA or use the phrase reasonable accommodation when requesting an accommodation. Therefore, any time an employee indicates that he or she is having a problem and the problem is related to a medical condition, the employer should consider whether the employee is making a request for accommodation under the ADA. Initially, the person receiving an accommodation request should respond even if their response is merely to explain the company's accommodation process and refer the employee on to the appropriate person to handle the request. Employers may want to designate a person to handle accommodation requests and then train all supervisors, managers, foremen, crew leaders, HR representatives, and others in positions that involve supervision of employees to consult with that designated person if they receive an accommodation request. According to the EEOC, the employer and the individual with a disability should engage in an informal process to clarify what the individual needs and identify appropriate reasonable accommodations. The employer may ask the individual relevant questions that will enable it to make an informed decision about the request. This includes asking what type of reasonable accommodation is needed. Employers should first consult with the employee who requested the accommodation to clarify what the individual needs and identify the appropriate reasonable accommodation. Often, the employee will be the best resource for information about accommodation needs. When the employee does not have all the necessary information, or when the employer wants to explore other options, the next step may be to request medical information from the employee's healthcare provider. The purpose of this interactive process is to determine what, if any, accommodation should be provided to an employee. During the interactive process, the employer may ask the worker relevant questions that will enable it to make an informed decision about the request. This includes asking for information about the desired accommodation, the nature of the problem prompting the request, and how the employee believes a disability has occasioned the need for an accommodation. Although the individual with a disability is not required to identify the exact accommodation necessary, they need to be able to describe the work-related problem that he or she is having and why he or she believes it's related to a disability. The Job Accommodation Network, known as JAN, is a free service of the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy. JAN provides free consulting services for employers seeking accommodation ideas. JAN maintains an extensive website with accommodation idea publications and a searchable online accommodation resource known as SOAR, which allows employers to independently search for accommodation solutions. The ultimate determination about reasonable accommodation to be provided is up to the employer. The employee can refuse to accept an offered accommodation. An employer should always try its best to provide a requested accommodation, provided that that employee is able to perform the essential job functions and that the accommodation would not create an undue hardship.